Hey, welcome back. The Collective Journey once again. Yeah.
What's going on, guys? It's Monday. Monday.
Right.
That's how I feel today.
Yeah. So how do you feel? You got your COVID shot today.
I feel okay right now. So when you came home last week, or what was it, 2 weeks ago, you were like, I don't feel good. I just need to lay in the bed. I have the chills. And so I was rushing through everything today, thinking that I was going to come home and that I was going to pass out. And I've actually held up okay. Not doing so bad, you know?
So it affects people differently.
Yeah.
And I think they said people have kind of got exposed to it, shouldn't feel as bad. So maybe at one point you got exposed to it.
Maybe. We don't know. But yeah, so we talked about it last week about how you got the COVID shot. And I didn't want to say anything about it, not because I wasn't planning on getting it, but because it was still kind of in limbo for me to get it. And
Oh, because you declined it?
I did. Thanks for putting that out there. I wasn't going to say anything. So what happened is I was the first one to get selected, and I was still on the fence about it.
And you panicked and you said...
I panicked, and I said, I'm going to wait.
No, things pretty much have changed to the point where they've made it. I think we talked about this last episode, but they've made it to where they force your hand on getting it pretty much. And now they're updating their policies over here in Germany because I don't know why. It seems like Germany's the only country that's like on super duper lockdown, but they're going super strict again. They did the lockdown, even more strict measures. And then since we live in the city, of course, it's even stricter. Now we got a fucking curfew, a 9 o'clock curfew. So it's like the purge, right? So like at 9, everything locks up and everything comes inside and people are looking outside to see who's outside in the city. And I'm like, damn, that's crazy, right? People started getting ticketed, all sorts of stuff. But if you have your COVID vaccine, you're immune to like a lot of things. You have to get a rapid COVID test. I think it's like $3, $4, $5. Mm-hmm. Some places will take
DM.
Yeah, some places will take that type of test, and others will take have to have an official test done by like a medical care provider, and that's valid for 48 hours if you want to do anything. It's a lot, right? We were trying to go to the park last week, like a little amusement park, a zoo, and that required a official COVID test, and I was like, you know what? We don't need it. Like, we'll just go to the normal park and have fun there if we're gonna do this whole COVID test.
Which is funny because last year, so we live by a private park that we love, and last year Abe was like, I only want us to go to the private park. Like, do not go to the public park. You know, the virus is lurking out there. And so we hit up the private park almost every day during the summer. And then today, or this weekend, it was like we swapped because we can't get into our private park anymore because of the official test, which I think, I get it, but it's just, we're living in different times now, and...
Times is changing, but...
It is.
At least I got to watch. I just finished binge watching I've been hitting up the HBO Max, you know. Saw the Godzilla, saw the Mortal Kombat. I know you were talking shit. That's fine. But I just finished up the Watchmen series, and that was so good. It was like a parallel universe of what would have happened after the Tulsa riots, you know, when they burned down the Black Wall Street, all that stuff. A really prominent black neighborhood, up and coming black neighborhood, which they had a lot of money, a lot of businesses and stuff like that. But I'm not going to spoil it, but pretty much it goes along that timeline. And then after that, they give reparations to everybody who was a survivor of the Tulsa riots or something like that. So everybody in the city or in the town is kind of like cashed out. And there's this big like animosity with, I guess, whites and blacks in that community. So there's like this like organization, pretty much the KKK, and they're trying to do away with this whole, do away with the whole community in the city because, you know, they try to burn it down one time and they're trying to do it again. But in this whole thing, there's like a grandfather who pretty much wants to pass on his legacy. He was an officer. He was like the first Watchman. He wants to pass on his legacy and give his memories, right, to his great-great-granddaughter that was, I guess, displaced with the Tulsa riots. And they developed like a drug. It's called nostalgia, which is for people who have, what's it called when you start Alzheimer's and dementia?
Alzheimer's.
Yeah. So you take these pills and they're like encapsulated forms of your memory so you can kind of come back into reality little by little, right? And the granddaughter takes them and has all these like crazy vivid memories and then goes on the story, right? But it made me think after she was like done taking the nostalgia pills and she was all messed up and she had all this like emotional trauma, right, from the nostalgia pills, I thought to myself, how is that? Is that something that's like real? You know, do we have some sort of generational trauma or memories, things that are passed down to our generations through like instinct or things of that nature? And I started doing some research, and it was pretty interesting.
And what did you find out?
Well, I guess it's actually a thing.
Yeah. Do you feel like there's that you could possess any generational trauma?
So I don't know. Who knows? You know, like it comes in like a bunch of different forms. Like the most primitive form is like if you're like a baby I guess one of the tests, right, that they do on Levi, right? Remember the test?
Yeah.
Okay. You don't. Okay, so
I'm like looking at him like I'm not.
That was the most blank stare ever. Anyway, one of the tests that they did on Levi, if you don't remember, is they did this drop test where they kind of almost like drop the baby real quick, real sudden, and the baby throws up its arms, right, as a reflex to grab on to something like a branch or to grab at somebody or someone, you know. So it's like
I do not remember this.
That's like an instinct, right? So like a lot of people when they're falling, they'll grab onto the first thing and they won't even realize it. They'll just like look up and they'll be like hanging from something because it's instinctual. It's like built into you to do that. Or to fear the dark, right? Mm-hmm. Because a lot of people get a lot of fear and anxiety once it gets dark. Why? Because our ancestors were raised, right? Mm-hmm.
It's like the fight or flight that you carry within you, right? I don't like to bring up other podcasters, but Joe Rogan was talking about this.
Oh, my good friend Joe Rogan.
Yeah, like our friend Joe Rogan, who we hang out with when we go to Austin. And he was talking about how, and this conversation actually stirred up an even more interesting conversation between us from listening to him talk about it, was how fight or flight is carried through the generations from the caveman era, because that's how they survived. And it's a very primitive thing that you have to worry about what's coming next in order to survive. Why are you laughing? Why are you smiling?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. And I thought, that's so interesting, because I come from, on my mom's side, I feel like with my grandmother, she worries about everything. I mean, about me crossing the street, if I'm going to wake up in the morning. And as I've gotten older, like I used to tell her like, you're crazy, you're crazy, you're crazy. But as I've gotten older, I see some of that coming out, like, and because I'm very self-aware, like that's, where that comes from, I try to work on that and not pass that down to Levi.
Yeah, so on this research, pretty much like they identified that there's different scales of like trauma that is passed on, right? One is being like the instinctual trauma from long ago, right? And then the other one is like they found people from like the Holocaust, like massive like atrocities, huge amounts of stress, people that lived under stress for generations. They actually, their DNA changed, right? So I was watching like this kind of this like small docu-series on Holocaust survivors and how their DNA changed, right, through the generations. So they're more predisposed to, like in their DNA strand, they're more predisposed to depression, anxiety, and then they have like an indicator, like a stress indicator, where they've been more affected by like stress on a level that is, I guess, identifiable in their DNA sequence. So they pretty much did this test on this these two couples, right? Both of them when they were young children, they're Holocaust survivors. Their kid ended up, they developed a lot of anxiety and PTSD, and their kids also develop a lot of anxiety and PTSD. Like that's a larger scale, and it's like scientifically proven that your DNA sequence changes when you go through like trauma, right? So one of those is like the Holocaust, right? We talked about that. Slavery, that's like another like huge emotional trauma. And then like indigenous people from colonization, pretty much any type of people that's been displaced, right? And I was watching this, it was actually like a healing emotional trauma within like the Aborigine community in Australia, which was really interesting. And they were like, much just like other indigenous cultures, they were like, they called themselves the generation of the forgotten or children or something like that. Mm-hmm. And pretty much it's like children that were sold into slavery, were raised without love, and they were predisposed to a lot of like trauma, emotional trauma, relationship trauma, all that stuff. So the Native Americans, right? Huge example, 70 million of them died. Like I think the Holocaust was 3 million, right? 5 million. But the Native American genocide was like 70 million Native Americans. So you think about the people that are like, have been displaced, right, in that time. And then you look at kind of the Native American community now, and you're like, are they thriving? So a lot of people would say that most Native American communities are plagued with like depression and alcoholism and stuff like that. Others are not, but I think like, I'm no scientist, right? And I'm no psychologist, but I'm like, a part of that has to be from some sort of generational trauma that's been passed down from generation to generation to generation, kind of like alcoholism runs in people's family. They're more predisposed to it, right? That type of mental illness, right?
Very true. And I think figuring out how to break that cycle that's what makes it hard, because they say that when you're, and don't quote me, but usually, like for example, when you're the child of alcoholism, right? And one of the parent is an alcoholic, and you grow up and you become an adult, and you think as a kid like, I will never be like this. I will never put someone else through this trauma. And then it comes time for you to come at the fork in the road, and it's like, which path are you going to take? And that's why they say, like, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and stuff like that, because most people take the path that they know. Most people don't think about taking a path that they don't know. Most people don't know how to ask for help. And most people, I don't think in society, like when we were growing up, we've talked about, like, we weren't taught to be self-aware of certain things. And I think that's what's great about Gen Z, is because they're so, and even our generation, like, we're so vocal, we're very unapologetic, we're very in your face with everything and anything and information. And, you know, the generations before us were taught, you don't talk about that. You know, we don't talk about mental illnesses. We don't talk about, you know, that your uncle has a drinking problem.
Yeah. I mean, there was a point in time where women were getting, like, lobotomized, right, for just speaking out on, like, depression or anxiety or something like that back in the 50s. And they're like, oh, you're crazy. You know, take these pills, or, you know, get this needle shoved up in your brain and become a zombie. Like, that to me
It's
is
scary.
crazy. Yeah.
And that's something that women have faced, which is probably why you see me and I'm so vocal and so unapologetic about my independence that I strive to have, because I think of things that my grandmother would tell me, and I see how she is today, and she's very much like very old school, like, you listen to everything that your husband says and the man is always right, and almost to the point where you don't know how to think for yourself. And then, you know, I used to get really frustrated, like we talked about it on the Evolve Your Generational Mindset episode that we did with Arturo. And check it out if you haven't yet. And I used to get frustrated with my mom and my grandma, because I'd be like, why are you like this? Like, why do you think this way? But I guess, you know, as a kid, like, you don't give them credit or grace for things that they endured in their path in life and what society was like at that point that they were growing up.
Yeah. It's like they're doing their best with the cards that they were dealt.
Yep. And that's what came out of that episode too. But with the circling back to the intergenerational trauma, like, when you're aware that there's certain things like this that run in your family, you can make the decision on your own to choose a different path. And that was one thing early on. So, you know, everyone who follows the podcast knows that I've gone to school for behavioral science, and I've had my fair share of experiences. And one thing that I learned early on when I was going to college was that most people don't take the path that they don't know because it's so unknown and it's intimidating, but it doesn't mean it can't be done. And to me, I remember hearing that and being like, wow, really? Like, I can be a completely different person than the generations before me. Like, I don't have to follow in their footsteps if I don't want to. And I can overcome certain things that I was told my entire life that I would never be able to overcome, because it is what it is. This stuff runs in our family. You know, I mean, anything from the smallest thing to my grandma worrying about, you know, if I'm going to wake up in the morning, to, you know, alcoholism and drug addiction, which I feel like is pretty prominent in every family. Like, that doesn't escape anybody's family. Nobody has a perfect family. But being aware of that, like, at a young age, it helped me, I feel like, overcome quite a bit of things. And, you know, like, we talk about having a toolbox, like a mental health toolbox, and you refer back to it. And I think that's the whole conversation about intergenerational trauma is so interesting to me. And then when we sat down and watched the documentaries together, I was like, you know, you just see a lot of things over the years, and it puts a lot of pieces of the puzzle together, and it makes you realize, like, what if what have I picked up that's not mine? And I know that we've had this conversation before because when I had the Reiki reading, I was told that I had 6 generations that followed me. And that really kind of, I don't know, like that gave me one of those like eerie feelings because it makes you, and as time goes on, I think like, what stuff am I dealing with that's not really mine? And I mean, that could be for anybody, that's just me. Like, you don't know what you could be dealing with that's not really yours, that may have just been passed down to you. And I've actually read, the first time I ever heard about this, it blew my mind, was I picked up this book, and I wish we had it with us, but we don't. But it's called No Mud, No Lotus. And I remember just being at a point in life where I felt like I hit a brick wall. And I remember picking up this book and being like, and just reading through it, like in the self-help section at Barnes and Nobles. And I'm like, I just need answers. I need answers. And I'm like flipping through it, reading it. And it was talking about how, again, with the intergenerational trauma, how it was the first time I'd ever read that sometimes you can inherit depression or mental and trauma and stuff like that from other generations. And that was the first time I'd ever heard that. So you fast forward to today and we're watching documentaries on it, and it's like, wow, this is, because when I remember picking up that book, I didn't really want to tell people that I found that, because I felt like, oh, if I show up at like a party and start talking about this, people are going to think I'm crazy. Not a legit party, but
you get on your soapbox and you're like, no mud, no lotus. How well do you know yourself? No. One of the things that they highlighted, kind of what you were saying, was we can identify heart disease, right? High blood pressure, diabetes, like physical predispositions to certain things that,
family history,
right? Cancer, things like that, right? So one of the things that they were like, why couldn't you do that for mental illness? And it's like pretty much cutting edge. Like they're just starting this thing. So they were like, why couldn't we develop a profile for somebody? And I guess you can, right? Like if your grandfather or your uncle or your mom was like schizophrenic or something like that, or, but those are like some extreme ones, right? They'd be like, oh, you're probably prone to this mental illness or something like that. But on a smaller level, like anxiety, depression, and stuff like that, like if you, I guess, start to document and really look at kind of your parents and your past, and you're like, how healthy were these people mentally? Like, let me take a step back, let me watch them, right? Because one of the things they highlighted was, in order to understand someone, to know yourself, right, you have to understand your parents and maybe some of the anxieties, mental illness, things, bouts of depression that they experienced. Some parents maybe mask or don't ever talk about that. They were depressed, or they're going through depression for a really long time, and then here you are going through depression, and you're like, oh, like this is kind of like I'm predisposed to maybe something that I'm carrying from you. And then the other thing was, how do you heal like intergenerational trauma, right? And one of the things was like identifying that, I guess, forgiving. It's kind of weird. It's like forgiving and moving past something that you've never experienced, right? So how do you even do that, right? Usually if you've been physically abused, right, there's some sort of coping mechanism, right? And they have like, I guess, steps or things that you can take in order to heal yourself, like, forgive and, things of that nature. But how do you, I guess, heal something that's never happened to you, I don't know.
I think sometimes maybe hold it. I don't have that answer, but my answer would be maybe, because you don't know what's wrong sometimes if you don't know what it is that's bothering you. And maybe when if you were able to get a piece of that history back, right? Like you're able to find out, and maybe just holding a space for that, and maybe when you find out, it maybe connects more of the dots. And like I said, sometimes throughout the years, I've been like, oh, this isn't mine. Like, this isn't me. Like, this is something that was passed down to me. Like, when I start to get scared, like I'm like, this is coming from my grandmother. This is like passed down. And like coming to peace with that's how she survived in her lifetime. And she endured a lot of things that I didn't have to. And kind of understanding like, oh, okay, like Hannah's not crazy. But holding a space of forgiveness and like trying to put it to rest and maybe be at peace and somehow mentally. And I'm a very spiritual person, so for me everything like goes back to spirituality and like maybe saying a prayer and being like, I'm gonna release this because this is not my thing. This is passed down to me. And they say like, it's part of manifestation, right? Like when you write it and you say it and you start to feel it and it actually manifests into something. So maybe something like that, like you're like, once you get your piece of your history back and you can put it to rest and maybe I always say like hold a special place for it, hold a moment of peace for it, and somehow try to mentally let it go, whether it's...
Yeah. The whole thing is kind of, I don't know, it's all on you, so that's kind of, it's kind of cool that that's on the cutting edge and people are like trying to figure out ways to cope, right? Or identify that you've been affected by some sort of trauma, right? Yeah. 9/11 was like one that like just happened recently, and the study that they did was on pregnant women who survived 9/11, and they had certain stressors, or their DNA was coded with a stress, like a stress indicator or something like that. It was pretty interesting. The whole thing is, I'm going to keep doing a little bit more research, but it just comes down to that whole, like, what, is it your environment or is it genetic, right? Of like kind of how you are, I guess a combination of both, right? But it's just, yeah.
I think the most empowering thing to take away from it though, because if anybody who listens, like I said, like some of us come from families where you're like, it's always been the same and it's always going to stay the same and it's never going to change. But the most empowering thing, the message that we heard in there was that it can change. Like when we talk about breaking that generational cycle of...
Yeah, you got to break the chain.
Yeah, you got to break the chain. And, going through therapy or like getting a life coach or, like just whatever, going to church, whatever your method is, those are ways to heal. And so to me, like that is very empowering to hear, to know that like you can do that, you can break that, and you don't have to pass it down. All these things can be overcome.
You don't. Yeah.
So you didn't really answer me earlier when I asked you. You kind of skimmed over the question when I was like, do you think that you could have inherited generational trauma? Like, and if you did, what would it have been?
So my dad has PTSD. So he pretty much, there was this massive, he's from Mexico City, but there was a massive earthquake in Mexico City at the time, and it pretty much like leveled the majority of things in Mexico City, right? So this dude, I guess he was in a subway, right?
Your dad was?
He was in a subway going to his next his job, right? You know, Mexico City, you take the subway, it's like New York, right? So he was in there, he was going to his work or something like that, or coming home from his work, something along those lines. But pretty much he started seeing the white dust, right? He got out of the subway. They were like, everybody get out, get out, get out. And he ran out the subway, right? And as he's like running out, everybody's running, right? Everybody's running. Some people covered in white smoke or in like white dust and stuff like that. And I guess he looked down the subway tunnel and he saw it like collapsing.
Oh my God.
And he said he got stuck, like pretty much at the stairs of the subway. Everybody's like running past him until it's like some lady ran up to him, was like, let's go, let's go, let's go.
Like he physically was stuck, or he like
physically, like mesmerized. Mentally and like physically, that like that was like happening, right? And I guess, I mean, these are seconds, right? Like you need to be moving, like every second counts. So as he's stuck, this woman comes up and is like, yo, let's go, let's go, let's go, and takes him and pulls him up there, right? And I guess he says it's like an angel that saved him, because when he looked for the lady that told him to start running, he couldn't find her. And the lady she was like so beautiful. She was like beautiful, like she was like the most beautiful woman that I've seen, you know? And but he couldn't find her. But I guess when he came out, he saw some of the buildings also start to, you know, collapse. You know, he's like in downtown and stuff like that, and buildings are like falling and crumbling and people running past them in like white smoke, pretty much like 9/11. And they're looking around, he's looking around, people are bloody, they're all messed up, you know, all this stuff, all this crazy stuff, bleeding and covered in white smoke. And he said he was just a zombie. And I guess he said at this point in time, it was like a couple months since he was like back home. I mean, this is like before, you know, Facebook and all that stuff. And he was working in a different part of the city. And he said he was just being selfish, like having fun and living life, right? And he said he started walking home. And I guess to his home in other part of Mexico City is like pretty far away. Said some random guy gave him a ride. He was just like in shock the whole way home until he went home and like saw his parents and stuff like that, because he was like, I need to see my family, make sure they're good, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, so he told me that later, but at the time I didn't know that. And as a kid, we used to actually go, I guess this is a long story, but as a kid, we used to go to Universal Studios, and one of the rides in Universal Studios pretty much is you get on this like little train, right? The tram, it takes you around the studios. And one of the things that goes into a subway, and there's an earthquake, and buildings are collapsing and things are on fire, and like, it's like a movie effects type thing, right? And you're on the bridge and it's shaking. I think it's like King Kong. It's like a movie section of King Kong, and like, you know, things are falling and King Kong comes out of nowhere and starts shaking you and does all this crazy stuff. But he used to always like preach like, oh, you know, like be brave, like never be scared, never look away from anything. And we're going in and I'm excited. I'm like, yeah, this is awesome, right? And I feel my dad like grip the tram cart and grab my shoulder really tight, right? And I look up and my dad has his eyes closed, right? This is a man that I've never really seen him scared of anything ever in my life, you know? That was the only point where I've ever really seen him scared. He's like pouring sweat, and he's pretty much kind of like having like some sort of like PTSD flashback to that time. And yeah, we get out, and I'm like, open your eyes, Dad, open your eyes. My dad's like, no, right? And anyway, So we get out, and I didn't really think anything of it until I really started thinking about kind of like his PTSD and like all that stuff. And I was like, oh, maybe he definitely has PTSD from earthquakes. And one of the things that they say is a lot of people get PTSD from earthquakes, destruction, and things that they've seen around them, because it's like crazy to see buildings, skyscrapers like falling, a lot of them, multiple skyscrapers or, buildings crumbling and, the road cracking. It's like the end of the world is pretty much happening. So am I affected by that trauma? I don't know. I don't necessarily, I don't get scared in like an earthquake type situation, but whenever there's some sort of like natural event that's going to happen, I do get very uneasy. Hurricanes, things of that nature, things that like I see destruction and, like that makes me really uneasy, and to the fact that like I almost want to doomsday prep. I'm one of the, it sounds crazy, but I guess I'm one of those doomsday preppers. Yeah, so if you know me, like, I'm kind of crazy when it comes to the whole doomsday thing. And even when, the virus started kicking off, I started like prepping and doing all this like for food and things of that nature. And it makes me feel very easy when there's like plans in place for things, right? Like I'm like, okay, we have our food rations, we have seeds to farm if we need a farm, or things of that nature. And like I don't have guns in Germany, but I'm a person that's never really had interest in weapons, but I see them as like definitely a thing that I might need for some sort of doomsday prepping or like post-apocalyptic scenario or something like that. So,
and I just want to add one thing. How much was that bag of rice? How much that bag of rice that you bought? How much did that weigh? 5 pounds?
Way more than 5 pounds.
Okay. Like, I'm like sitting here thinking,
I might have to throw that out or give that away. But yeah, I guess when I started buying bags of rice, I probably wasn't thinking through. I was thinking there was going to be a food shortage and we were going to have to survive on rice and beans, when this whole thing was going down. So I was like, at least we're going to have some food. I'm not going to get caught. They can fight over the toilet paper,
That's for damn sure. I was not worried about no toilet paper.
I need nutrition. So yeah, I guess maybe in a way, maybe that's affected me in that way that I am. Yeah, I get kind of crazy when it comes to natural disasters. I want the Tesla roof tiles, the solar panels. I want, the power cell battery for the generator, and I would like to be fully self-sufficient as a human being. I don't know if that comes from that type of trauma of like, disasters and things. I don't know. Who knows?
But see, that's the flip side of it, because in the documentary that we watched, they were talking about how having trauma embedded in your DNA, right, is not necessarily a bad thing, that it could be a good thing in a way. And so that's a situation where it's kind of switched, where you have taken his situation and, you guys have passed down through the generations of more self-awareness and like how to take care of yourself and how to survive. So I think that's pretty interesting. I didn't really know that story until now, and I was getting a little teary-eyed. But I think that it's great.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off, but I guess that does make sense. So one of the things that they highlighted for Holocaust survivors or people who've gone through some sort of crazy thing in their life, they start to become hoarders. Or even like immigrants, people that didn't have anything, they're like people that lived through the Great Depression, right? They didn't throw anything out. So they were like, no, we need this can, we need this, we need that, we could use this, It's like a survival mode tactic embedded in you.
Yes.
Yeah.
There you go. I think it's great, though, that that they're making it more open to have this conversation. Because you think about our generation and the generations, in front of us, Levi's generation, and how much better off will they be because we're opening this conversation and we're allowing a space for it to be had. And whereas, like we talked about earlier in the conversation, that back in the day, like, you weren't allowed to talk about this kind of stuff, and I've told you before, I'm like, you pay close attention, and as you said, to women's history, they would just give us a lobotomy if we said too much. And so I think it's great progress. If you ask me, it's a little bit slow progress, but I think it's great that we're opening the conversation to, if you experiencing certain things in life, that it could be tracked, that it's, due to generational trauma. And the more you know, the better off you are, and you can take care of it and find resources. And so we just wanted to have this conversation with you guys this week that, kind of gearing back to what we like to bring to you guys, that unfiltered, unpolished mental health awareness message. And you never know. You never know what you may have picked up that might not be from your experiences, but maybe your parents' experiences, maybe your grandparents' experiences. And that's why it's a really good thing to have these open and honest conversations. It's really important. And if, you're not given that gift to have those open and honest conversations, well, I would just like to say, don't screw the pooch on the next generation, and make sure that you give that opportunity to your kids, so that way, going forward, you guys can do better. And just something to think about throughout the week. And don't forget to rate, subscribe, and review. I think I definitely said that all out of order. And if you guys like this week's episode, tag us on Instagram. Let us know. We will talk to you guys next week. Check you later. All right, guys. Thanks for listening.